Lawyers, cops of Reddit. What is the stupidest thing you've seen someone do to cover up a crime? Client was embezzling money from his engineering firm. Client actually had the money he had embezzled in his possession and could still return the money. He would have faced penal liability, but we could have pleaded him out to have served no more than a few months of probation. Under his circumstance, prison time was unlikely. Client does not believe our advice. Client believes he is going to prison. Client believes his best course of action is to return to his country of birth, Iran. The United States strictly prohibits transfer of technology which can be used for nuclear programs to Iran. I explain this all to client. Client tries to board a flight to Iran. In his luggage is a programmable logic controller his firm had been subcontracted with the federal government to develop. I don't know why he was taking this PLC with him, but it was there when he was pulled off the airplane in Stuttgart and taken into custody. Client is now facing up to 20 years in federal prison for espionage and unlawful transfer of classified military technology to a hostile power. People, listen to your ducking lawyers. O grave a circumflex a diaresis. To all the shoplifters who think you're smooth, keep in mind grocery stores know what angle to put camera at to perfectly capture people stuffing things in their pockets or down the front of their shirts. And in many stores those cameras are higher quality than you'd think they'd be. I've had files where I can make a continuous film following someone around the store and out the door, then cross-reference the timestamp with the store receipts to show you paid for the mac and cheese but not the 3 steaks in your pants. I can't believe I went to school for 7 years for this. Katrina destroyed my cousin's house, so we took her in at just 21 years old. My cousin was an alcoholic and addicted to sugar. This only came to light because she'd been stealing bottles of wine from the local gas station across the street. We found out because the same family had run the gas station for 30 years and the grandpa character was very good friends with my father. He actually called him out of concern. Tracy has been stealing wine. A lot of wine. At first, I think she is a rebellious young girl. I did not call the police because I respect your family, but I worry for her and cannot afford for her to take any more for free. Not a criminal matter, but I worked on a child welfare case in which the parents were ordered to undergo hair follicle testing for drug use. So the father, not my client, thankfully, shaved off all the hair from his body, even his eyebrows. But he said it had nothing to do with the drug testing. It's just something he wanted to do. I think the kid ended up with relatives, in case you were wondering. I knew a chick who robbed a house. She was house sitting for silverware and jewelry. She pawned it off at the closest pawn shop to the house, so she was caught right away. However, being the dope fiend she was, she poured bleach all over the house to get rid of her fingerprints. Instead of petty theft, she ruined the stairs and all the hardwood floors and paint on the walls and ended up with damages exceeding 10k if I remember correctly, which launched her well into new legal territories. My stepfather got drunk and hit a few parked cars. He drove home and hid the car in the garage. The cops followed the trail of antifreeze to our house. A standoff ensued with my dad holed up with guns. When the cops got in and arrested him, he was shouting at the top of his lungs, "I am the outlaw Josie Wales." I was out with my boyfriend and missed it all. The actor-director Adrienne Shelley was in her apartment when a guy broke in to rob the place. He punched her, knocking her out. Thinking he killed her, he tried to make it look like she committed suicide by hanging her in the bathroom. Turned out she didn't die from the punch, but she did die from the hanging. Dude could have just gotten charged with band and assault. Instead he got convicted of murder. Not either of the specified parties, but I work alongside both. There was this story a while back about a murder that just baffled me. This lady's husband had a fight with her and then disappeared. She said he went to Florida, angry, and told her to sell all of his stuff and get a divorce. So she sold all his stuff, the house, etc. I think she may have gotten the divorce, too, simply because he was unavailable for contact at any time. No emails, calls, etc. were answered. Of course, there were suspicions of foul play. Nothing came of them for a while, though. The lady sells their marital home and buys a house in a slightly more upscale part of town. After something like 7 years, the cops finally get to search the place. They found her husband in the closet. She had chopped him up into pieces, put those pieces into Tupperware containers, and wrapped those containers in alternating layers of scented trash bags and dryer sheets, along with air freshener beads, in order to keep anyone from smelling him. Why the hell would you hang on to dead husband bits for so long? We live by the sea. She could have just pitched them out there at any time and bam. Nobody knows. Eater article link. There was a guy who went to his buddy's house after nearly beating his girlfriend to death. Police end up showing up to the house where the guy was. Friend answers and buddy shows up behind the guy not wearing a shirt. This is important. Police say who they're looking for and both men say they don't know who that person is. Here's the kicker. The guy that's shirtless? Who beat his girlfriend half to death? He has his first initial and last name in a big bold tattoo across his chest. A guy I worked with was being charged with dangerous driving following a pursuit involving a police helicopter. He would have faced a fine and 1-year driving ban. His lawyer told him to plead guilty. He ignored this advice and insisted on going to trial, and his sole defense was that the police didn't have any kind of video recording proof of his crime, as though this was some kind of technicality that would get him off. In questioning he even admitted to what he did, but still tried to convince the court that he was not guilty because there's no video recording. The court threw everything at him, everything bar a prison sentence. Got a suspended one instead. The arresting police officer even told him he would just got a telling off had he stopped, but his insistence on trying to play the system ended up majorly screwing him over. I dealt with a guy once who had burned his parents' garage down. He had been drink driving, hit a cyclist and hurt them. Driving ban. Fine. Maybe a suspended prison sentence given he had never been in trouble before. He was only 19 years old, but in his drunk mind he decided that police couldn't prove he had been drink driving if there was no car, but he had parked the car back at home in the garage. So he ducking well set the garage on fire with a can of petrol, destroyed the garage, the car, the side of the house, the mobile home parked on the driveway, and a large proportion of his neighbor's garden. Still got charged with drink driving amongst other things. This more of a failure to cover up, but I had a client who drove across the country to try to collect a drug debt. The police found the handwritten budget he had made for the trip. Items 1 and 2 were gun and bullets. Just happened last night. I work in a college town. Around 2:30 the bars close and the parade of drunk students commences. Kid had one traffic cone on each arm and one on his head, walking jauntily down the main drag. As soon as I pulled up next to him he started doing the robotic drunk guy acting sober walk. Carefully put the cones down on the sidewalk and kept walking as though nothing had happened. Forgot about the one on his head, though. My nephew robbed a liquor store during a snowstorm in the middle of the night. He didn't have a car so he had to walk. All the cops had to do was follow his footprints back to his house. He also stole $500 from my parents and hid the money in his ass. He was the only person in the house during the crime, so it couldn't have been anyone else. My parents demanded the return of the money and he complied. That was a pretty itty thing to do. Saw the trial for a guy who had killed a baby, strangle marks on its neck, bruising in its groin, bleeding from every orifice. So very obviously it was attacked and beaten. He claimed that he saw a spider when he woke with the baby on his chest and accidentally threw it off the bed. He even ducking told a guy, who was called as a witness, that he's done it and exactly how. What an idiot. Well, according to the full confession I got to read as part of the arraignment papers, someone allegedly got all his co-conspirators and accessories to agree to penetrate the dead girl's V post-mortem. To be redundantly clear, with a makeshift dildo and then pour bleach all over her genital region. The idea was to make it seem as though the murder had been consequent to her abuse, which it hadn't actually been, which the perpetrator, S, had then attempted to cover up by destroying any lingering physical evidence. You know, to throw people off the trail. If that doesn't sound quite logical to you, congratulations. You might not be an unmedicated schizophrenic with terrible taste in friends. Guy committed arson, but he's such an idiot that he bought the propane tanks at Costco. Costco knows a lot. I wasn't a cop or a lawyer at the time. I was 8, but I think you guys will love this story. My mum worked at a school for teenage boys. One day one of them decided he was going to buy a pound of plastic explosives from the internet, using the school computers. Then for good measure he fesses up to my mum when the rumors go round that there's some kind of bomb at school. Now my mother knew that this boy was not malicious in any way, just an idiot with too much money on his hands. So she calls up the chemistry teacher, who was Polish and rotund, and had already been in trouble several times for exploding things in his classroom. Dr. Explosja decides that the best course of action is to smuggle the explosives and the idiot student out of the school, take him to a field that the student's family owned, and perform a controlled detonation. He said I could come along too, since I was an 8-year-old that loved explosions and seeing people get in trouble. So anyway, the stupidest thing I've seen someone do to cover up a crime is tell everybody in authority what they did and then explode the evidence with an 8-year-old as a witness. Female, distant family member got involved with an older guy, and together they kidnapped a guy to rob him, stole his car, murdered him, and then drove to a remote place where they doused the car in gas and lit it on fire. The boyfriend got burned on his hands. They arrested the girlfriend when she was shoplifting bandages and burn salve from the drugstore. The whole thing fell apart from there. They may have gotten away with it if she had bought the stuff for under $10. There was an Indian guy who burned his daughter's apartment building down because she was living with a guy from a lower caste or something in the Chicago suburbs. He threw the gas can he used in the dumpster right next to the building. It had his name on it. Edit. Forge a hospital admission for an alibi. Pity the doctor whose signature got used was overseas for a conference. He was carrying a small butterfly knife, which is illegal. He tried to hide it by swallowing it. Had to lean him forwards and frantically hit him on the back to dislodge the damn thing as he turned blue. It is like a $100 fine, and you lose the knife. So he ended up in much more trouble, but in the end he got off with a larger fine and a real talking to from a judge. Bloody twit. I once defended a guy who was charged with harassing his ex-girlfriend, mostly through Facebook, as he waited for his trial date. This genius decided to set up a fake account in the name of his ex-girlfriend and privately message himself soppy love letters in an effort to prove this woman was actually still into him and he hadn't been harassing her. I guess he forgot that the messages he had been sending to his actual ex were things like duck you ducking itch I'm going to rip your ducking cunt out etc. I tried explaining that no amount of sappy feel-good exchanges were going to explain that it away even if the court believed his ridiculous story. But this guy kept insisting that the fake account was real. And you know, I had no proof it wasn't. And junior lawyer me lacked the experience to tell this guy to go fly a kite. So on the trial date he shows up and he has all these printouts of messages between him and his ex's new account. But he's totally gone off the deep end. He's started fighting with himself through his pretend messages, rehashing old arguments he used to have with his ex. It was the saddest, stupidest echo chamber of idiocy I've ever had to shout through to get the client to pay attention. He couldn't even keep on good terms with his pretend ex that he had total control of. The messages had spiraled into much the same abuse. We went for a peace bond as a last-minute plea bargain and I never heard from him again. My ex-boyfriend started beating me in front of 4 of my friends. And after they pulled him off of me, he called the police on them for assault. This doesn't fit in strictly with the question asked, but I once knew a woman going to Crown Court for charges of theft, benefit and credit card fraud, and she paid for the taxi to her hearing with a stolen credit card of one of the victims and still pled innocent. Yay. She went to prison. Not a cop or lawyer, but a few months ago my friend called me asking for advice. She was with a friend of hers and they had weed on them, and for an unrelated reason got into an altercation with local police. The cops were coming to her car, so she told her friend to hide the weed in her pants. The girl puts the bag of weed in her underwear, I guess, and when the cops came they could smell weed and were pretty much like alright, guys, just give it up. But they were both vehemently denying they had anything on them. And one of the cops was all up, "What's sticking out of your pants?" And the girl argues that she's on her period and it's her pad. Neosus copyright airing she was wearing leggings. And it was obvious. They clearly didn't buy it and could see something stuffed there. And after about 20 minutes of arguing they were pretty much like, you either take it out now or we arrest you, go downtown, and strip search you. The girl got a weed ticket. TLDR. Friend of a friend tried to hide weed in her undies. Cops could see it. Ended up getting a weed ticket. My sister is a Sergeant Leo that used to work in robbery. She shows up to court to be present for the case where a guy is on trial for robbing a bank. They have him on camera and he wants to represent himself. No lawyer. His opening line is, "Yes, Your Honor, I'd just like to point out that you can't tell that was me on camera because I was wearing a hat. Yeah, that was a fast trial." Client figured he could get away with theft by erasing the 20 minutes of footage from the home security cameras. Client was accused of embezzling millions from a company. This was simply false. The company owner had been hiding it from his spouse. The owner's lawyer called me up to extort my client and told me that if our client testified as to facts in support of his defense in the divorce, that they would appreciate it. If my client would not perjure herself, they would have her prosecuted. I recorded the attorney and filed a transcript along with a motion with the court. The judge brought down the hammer and he was professionally disciplined by our state licensing authority for attorneys. This is a true story. When I was an ADA, a colleague of mine had a case where a couple of guys robbed a jewelry store. The police showed up and there was chase. They all split up and all got caught. But one of them had a bit of head start. Apparently he ran into a beauty salon and started yelling that he needed to dye his hair immediately. And then the police ran in after him. Oh, and there was also the guy who stole jewelry out of someone's house and shoved it up his ass when he got caught. They found it during the strip search because some of it was still hanging out. Finally there was a guy wanted for murder. He had a long ponytail and a few days after the murder he cut it off and got his head shaved. When he was arrested he still had the ponytail in his pocket. Small town in Arkansas. The pharmacy is in a rock building with a tin roof. Some guys who steal it figure out with a crowbar they'd get right in. And they were right. So they threw the drugs into the backseat instead of the trunk. They stopped to get gas and are just about to be on their way. A state trooper is headed to the same station to take a leak and get coffee. The guys play it cool. They start the car and floor it. Burned rubber nearly crashed getting on the highway. Being an experienced trooper, this sparked his curiosity, so he hits the lights and begins pursuit. Finally gets them stopped, and once he sees a pile of pill bottles he has some idea about what may be going on. Hauls them to the county jail and is inventorying everything when the sheriff says the local pharmacist is on the phone, so he may as well talk to him. Pharmacist wants to report a burglary. Trooper asks did they take and begins reading the inventory. Pharmacist says that sounds right. Trooper says well I think I solved it. Yell no collusion at the top of their lungs. Not a cop lawyer, but I went to school with a girl who called the cops when someone stole her meth. She then allowed the police to search her apartment, in which she was using to cook meth. Obligatory, not a cop or anything, but a clever ruse that 8-10-year-old me would go off without a hitch. It was the school holidays and I was up late playing video games when I decided I was thirsty. Wandered over to the fridge to find there was nothing to drink except the beers my dad kept in the fridge. So what do? I have me a beer, but then realize he is going to notice when there's one less bottle out of the 6 or so already in there, so I start panicking. Decide the best idea is to fill the empty bottle back up with ducking water and put it back in the fridge with the lid screwed back on as best I could. About a week later my dad hit me up about obviously fake beer and I just claimed ignorance until he couldn't contain his laughter at how stupid the whole situation was. I cried and we moved on as a family. Not a cop or a lawyer. Had 2 kids I knew from high school kill a guy, chop his head off and burn his fingers. They were caught. It was national news. The worst part? One had a house party 2 weeks before they killed the guy. He was drunk and pissed me off, so I gave him an Aperdica. A mere 2 weeks before savagely murdering somebody. Tech guy here. This is a 6th grader's search history which I hope is good enough. Hot 6 asses. How to delete search history. History not deletable. Not a lawyer cop. Saw a guy get arrested across the street from the ED. His defense was no officer. I don't do drugs. This weed ain't for me. I just sell it, man. Apparently he thought selling was legal, but doing it wasn't. Moved himself up to a felony though. I mean, I'm not a cop or a lawyer, so take this down if it has to, but this morning on the radio they were talking about a woman who told a cop that she has a prescription for her heroin and had a pill bottle with a handwritten label. The police suspected a woman to have something to do with drugs, so they kept an eye on her. They used the same car for 2 weeks. Woman noticed it and called the police because she thought she had a stalker. So 2 police officers visited her and found the cannabis she was growing in her house, which is illegal here. Tip for growing cannabis: do not call the police to your house. Tip for stakeouts: do not use the same car for 2 weeks, especially in an area where there are not too many cars parked on the street. I read this police report my first week in the prosecutor's office. Still makes me laugh every time I think about it. Some guy was pulled over for having a taillight out. The police officer had no reason to suspect he had anything illegal on him. He was just going to write a ticket and be done with it. Guy is convinced that the officer knows he has heroin in the car. His idea to cover up our crime of possession is to just start doing the heroin while the cop is in his car writing the ticket. Officer walks back. See the guy snorting heroin. Says, "What are you doing?" Guy replies, "Heroin." Moral of the story: don't cover up your drug possession by doing the drugs in front of a cop. When I was young and dumb, this girl we had staying with us had walked up to the store and called the police on me for hitting her. Although I did not hit her, I fell a bit backwards when I got up because I was drunk. I was 19. I went and hid in an empty storage locker in the basement, but got worried I was going to get caught there, so I went and hid behind a door. Of course, the first place cops look when they go into a room is behind the door. Then I tried to resist, ended up getting carried out with 1 cop on each arm. As we approached a door that lead to the stairs out of the building, I decided to try to push off the door to try to get the cops to fall backwards. I got maced instead and an added charge of resisting. I would have probably just got a MIP, but I made it much worse. Lawyer here. Not quite covering up a crime but still stupid. I had a case where the other party was trying to claim that my client had no rights to a vehicle they bought together during their marriage. To support his claim, he told the judge that he was already married in another state when he married my client, thus making their marriage invalid. So it's just his truck, not hers. Not only is he incorrect legally, but he admitted, under oath, on the record, to committing a felony for which he was already under investigation. All for a beat up old car, which the judge promptly awarded to my client. Not a cop or lawyer but former corrections officer. We had a guy who murdered his neighbor. So after the murder he set the apartment on fire as well as a car and at some point cut off the victim's arms. He then threw the arms at first responders to the fires. Yeah, it was a weird night. Cop here. Truthfully, most criminals are dumb. Like real dumb. They do stupid stuff to try and escape consequences all the time and end up making it worse. I'll give you a few examples. What would have been a ticket for theft turned into multiple felonies when a girl tried to hide her ID in a shopping bag that she used to steal stuff by stuffing it into my back seat. It was a plastic sack. They're not quiet. She had the longest criminal history I had ever seen. She gets caught a lot. Had a kid run from me in handcuffs after being picked up for a juvie probation warrant. He kicked out my back window. Dove headfirst into the pavement before trying to jump a 6-foot fence. In handcuffs, he got halfway over. His shirtless half slid down the top of the fence, where I picked him up with a bajillion splinters and booked him for multiple felonies. If he'd just cooperated he would have been home by lunchtime. I had a meth head steal Yoo-hoo, some Twinkies, and a Red Bull from a grocery store. She had over $1K in her purse. Security detained her. They called us and wanted us to issue a trespass warning, don't come back for 1 year, and escort her off the property. When she saw us she decided it'd be great idea to try and run, pushing people away and knocking down some random soccer mom. Now, instead of a warning, we have theft plus assault plus deadly equals robbery. This was all in the last month. Obligatory, not a cop but a buddy of mine tried to hide weed in his locker. Oh yes, he got busted. It was gold. I knew a lawyer, she was not my client, who blew the statute of limitations on a low-dollar personal injury case. Instead of informing her firm, she got the client to agree to settle for $40K, faked up the settlement paperwork and gave him $40K that she embezzled from her church. She was the treasurer. That came to light. She paid back the church, she had the money, pled out to a misdemeanor and was disbarred. When I was in high school we had a yearly scavenger hunt with a bunch of dumb and silly things to do. one of which was doing a fire in the hole. We did this at our local Burger King, and right after we went to the Kroger across the parking lot to continue the hunt. The police showed up not long after. We were under 18, so we just got taken to the police station and called our parents. We felt stupid for being the only group that got caught, but while we were waiting, a senior from another group came in with handcuffs on. He got naked and jumped on a car, stopped at a light in front of his car. There was a cop 2 car behind him. Also, one of the things on the hunt list was to steal a garden gnome and put it in front of the police station. So it was pretty funny seeing about 10 different gnomes with evidence tags in them while we were calling our parents. The cops got a good laugh out of it too. Edit. I should have explained a fire in the hole is ordering a drink in drive-thru and tossing it back at them. No explosives were involved. Client finds out his 8-year-old stepdaughter is alleging sexual abuse, so he sits down with a camera recording a conversation with her 6-year-old sister and feeds the sister lines about how older girl is mad at him and just wants him out of the house. At trial, prosecutors bring up the much too convenient timing.